Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with our weekly Q&A thing. It's a podcast. It's a video. You can listen to this on a bunch of podcasting platforms, linked in the description, and you can watch it on YouTube at BDCKR Gaming. And I have kind of funny news. About the podcasting platforms. I recently had a friend say, my name, if you had a podcast, I'd listen to it. And then somebody else who knew about the channel said, he does have a podcast, actually. And I was like, yeah, but you probably don't want to listen to it. And my friend was like, no, I'll give it a listen. I'll give it a listen. And so I sent them, they use Spotify. So I sent them the Spotify podcast link. And I'm like, I don't think you'll enjoy it because they don't play Injustice.
Okay.
So they don't have context for understanding it. And I'm like, I would not listen to season 11 this season because obviously... there's Injustice content built in for every episode, right?
So I think that the origin story episode is probably the best.
I don't know though, because that's very navel gazing. I feel like if you don't care about us, you don't care about that.
That's true. Maybe.
And by us, I mean us as a channel, not me as a person, because this person obviously does, take some kind of interest in me as a person.
Right.
But they have no love for the entity BDCKR Gaming. Right. And I was like, I don't think you're gonna like it, but here you go. I did say I'd send it to you. So, and they have not talked to me about it, so I assume they bounced off because it wasn't that interesting, which is entirely fair. I think this only really makes sense to listen to if you at least care enough about Injustice that you're willing to hear us drone on about Injustice, and also a little bit are interested in this other stuff we have to say. And I think at most this friend is willing to listen to the stuff I have to say, but also people are busy, right? So I think when somebody says, "Oh, if you had a podcast, I'd listen to it," they normally mean that in sort of like a passive way, and they mean it sort of as like a compliment that they never have to actually follow up on.
Right.
But unfortunately for this person, I wasn't even going to say anything, but they got caught in the trap of a friend being present who knew about this.
Yeah.
And they had to make good on their sort of statement instantly. Yeah. Which is, if anything, just a little bit unfortunate for them.
Right.
But anyways, you're not listening to this episode probably, but if you are, welcome. thanks for tuning in.
Right.
But this is season 11, the season of the Lost Challenges, and the reason why
Lost Challenge characters,
yeah. And the reason why it's bad for my friend to listen to is because we'll start this episode, like every episode this season, talking about what you're watching if you're on the video, which is Wonder Woman 600.
Right.
Her passive is Amazonian Fury, which means that all female characters on Wonder Woman's team receive 30% more damage and power generation. She's got 800 attack, 1,100 health. She was last available before 2017, so it's been years and years and years, like 7 years, right? At least.
Right.
Yeah.
So, lowish stats, not surprised because it's a very old challenge, but I think with her passive, effectively that becomes the equivalent of 1,040 attack, which puts her pretty decent, actually. Great passive. It applies to many different characters across many different universes. Being a female character is way more interesting than just, say...
Justice League or Joker or whatever.
Or Suicide Squad or whatever, right?
Or like specific universes.
Right. So we've got her with our usual Hawkgirl and Rebirth Raven team. And because obviously they're all women, benefits really from it a lot. All right, so Hawkgirl, she gets boosted damage and power generation. That's all net positive. Interestingly enough, Rebirth Raven... All right, so the increased damage is good. Increased power generation is a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah, it makes her a little bit harder to use at maximum effectiveness.
Right, because of her passive of stealing power, where she only steals if she has less power than the opponent when she tags in. So the more power she gets and the faster she gets it, the less likely she'll have power that's lower than the opponent, which means she can't steal it. And it's critical then that Rebirth Raven has Enchantress Companion Gear to lock out the opponent's specials, because there's going to be a few more random instances where we just can't steal it because we just build up power too quickly. Wonder Woman 600. So because we're using these challenge characters as the star on the team, that means special specialist. And this is where you run into trouble with Wonder Woman 600. She has bleed on her special 2, which cuts the stated max damage by 50% compared to what it should be given her attack stat. On top of that, her special 2, because really, special 2 for your special specialist is usually the winner. Special 2, it's not ranged. meaning Master's Death Cart will shove the opponent too far away so that only the last hit of Special 2 might land. In some cases, maybe you'll miss all of them if you're trying to tag in and do a Special 2 right away, so you can't. Now, normally that's not that big a deal, but it means that when you're tagging in against opponents with any power, it's a bit of a pain because you cannot drop any kind of high damage special. If anything, actually, if you look at the numbers, her Special 1, which only takes 1 bar of power, does more than half the damage of a Special 2.
Yeah.
I mean, again, okay, so she gets bleed damage, but the problem with bleed damage is that the opponent can just tag out and rinse it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, her Special 1 is ranged, but it's too fast, so that even with Hawkgirl's passive letting you tag in and out faster, you may be vulnerable if you don't get your second bar of power against an opponent that's ready to do some damage. So you tag in, do Special 1, it's so fast that you're still not ready to tag back out again.
Mm-hmm.
So you need at least 2 Special 1s. So in other cases, it might be worth giving a character like this Quake Engine to both boost the Special 2 damage as well as increase the damage over time, the bleed damage that she's doing. Unfortunately, her Special 2 does so little damage, and her Special 1 is so fast and ranged that Claw of Horus really is the clear winner as a third gear for the last slot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So she's really good. Hard to make her the star, as you're seeing here, but she is a really great support character for the right team, and there's lots of right teams for her.
Yeah. So there we go. We are now going to be returning to our tier list conversation. And to start out, I don't think we need to talk about this super long, but one of our commenters has some sort of
follow-up from last week.
Yeah. So this was from Captain Hayes 1374, and they say, "Hey BDCKR, I'm honored to be a part of the tier list conversation. I thought I would give some additional context on our differing methodologies. You are correct, I do highly value versatility, which is because part of the fun of Injustice for me is using a wide variety of interchangeable and effective teams. While similar to you guys, I also primarily value speed and reliability on multiplayer ladders. Our difference is that I don't have a stockpile of recharges to burn through. This means that I play both 5 and 7 match ladders and switch between multiple teams when playing. I also hold the opinion that there is some level of diminishing returns when it comes to ladder completion speed, and fun factor is more valuable to me than minor time optimization. For example, I'm a fan of nuke builds, so that's also why some suboptimal offensive picks make the cut for my S tier." And so that's cool, right? Ultimately, I think we have maybe a 90% overlap with this person, right, in terms of what we value, but those minor differences change it, and, we're not going to, because we, I think, spent more than enough time talking about their comment and our own personal opinions. But we could, with this sort of new lens and complete information, go through their list and see if we're speaking to what matters to them, if their tier list makes more sense, right? And I believe that it likely would, right? So just interesting. Thanks for your feedback. I think the thing about the tier list, and I don't know if this is true for you, but it's certainly true for me, is to me the idea of the tier list and why people make the decisions they make and all of that sort of stuff is more interesting to me than just who's at the top of the list. Because I think, it's very easy for people to disagree and just say, I like this guy because this. And then somebody else says, no, I like, this girl because this. And then you both just say, you're wrong, right? And it's not, to me, nearly as interesting, especially when, there's going to be a lot of agreement. Some of it is obvious, right? Some S tier characters should be on everybody's tier list no matter what. Mm-hmm. And then some of it, there's going to be, disagreement that kind of matters and kind of doesn't matter, right? Because it's just people's personal preference. And so neither of those are super interesting to me on a base level, but sort of understanding how people construct lists. It's almost like a measure, right? When you're constructing a research project or something, right? The most important thing is to justify your metrics and your method and everything enough that both, one, somebody could repeat the exact same thing if they wanted to. They could theoretically do the same experiment the same way. But more importantly, you are sort of doing an experiment, or in this case a tier list, as a stand-in, right? You are saying, these are the best characters. I think these are the best characters in the game. And the assumptions that you make, the sort of what criteria you're using for determining best and all of that stuff matters a lot, because then other people get to look at your list and say, I agree with this or I disagree with this. And if they don't have sort of what you're valuing, they don't have enough information to understand like if your list makes sense on your own terms or if it makes sense on somebody else's terms. And so in like a research project, oftentimes you will do something as a stand-in, right? You're trying to measure, for example,
a surrogate.
Yeah, a surrogate. So you're trying to measure intelligence, which I think is like not even a super useful metric to measure in most cases, but it's an easy example to talk about. So to measure intelligence, you're trying to have IQ, and for IQ you need to do a specific test. And the test that you pick matters a lot. If it's a test that's just on vocabulary, right? Somebody else can look at that and go, well, you're trying to make a statement about the intelligence of this group of people, and all you've done is test their vocabulary. So you need to have enough sort of information to either agree or disagree and sort of develop like a conversation around it. And so I think what Captain Hayes has done a really good job of is giving us that initial methodology, but then also following up and giving us more detail about exactly sort of what their criteria and methodology is. So I find this stuff to me the most interesting. So I really appreciate that follow-up.
So this is what was making me reluctant to do the S tier discussion from the beginning, right? Because a lot of the kind of threads that you might see in the Injustice subreddit start off with, here's the S tier, and they jump right to like what you're saying. Well, this person doesn't belong here. And then it misses entirely the discussion. Because I think the most interesting part is the qualifiers, like how you decide it. That's actually more interesting to me than laying out the criteria and then picking the characters. Because, I mean, if you have enough experience, there's going to be general consensus, right? Like if you talk about your criteria, I think it's more interesting to have a discussion about why certain criteria matter more to you than other people.
Yeah.
And so instead of again, it becomes a more interesting discussion because instead of having to work to figure out what somebody's criteria are, trying to unpack it based on how they've picked it, instead of, you don't have to waste that time talking past each other.
Yeah. And so I guess it's not surprising that we find similar things appealing because I do have 50% your brain on my dad's side.
Right.
But it is funny because I feel like for both of us, a lot of times those sort of tier list discussions skip the parts that we're interested in.
Right.
And the parts of the conversation they have are the parts of the conversation that we find less interesting and appealing.
So, and just to point out, right, the idea of fun, Captain Hayes, if you haven't seen it, we've got a fun list where I agree with you. There's certain things that you do not because it's fast, but because it's interesting. And there's a bunch of stuff that used to be possible, like making Reverse Flash go invisible, making Apocalypse Darkseid huge, like a giant, and us little ants fighting him.
Yeah, and the way that like we like to have like teams where you can get the most damage with the least amount of time spent in combat, right?
Yeah, it's all fun.
Or when we would try to do suboptimal gear on purpose, right? The most sort of consistent team that we felt like we weren't making any compromises for with the lowest possible gear score, right? Yeah. So there we go. Thank you for that comment. Good way to start and sort of center ourselves in the type of discussion that we want to be having. Caleb Whitaker 6208. As promised, we are coming around to your comment now. They say this is going to be a bit long, haha.
And haha, we may not read all of it. We're going to focus on the parts that we care about.
Yeah. So they say, I think your question of turning the tier list, so to speak, back on the viewers is interesting. While I don't have experience with every character in the game, I think my S tier would be much smaller than that of most others. I think just about every character in the game can be argued down to A tier. They all have drawbacks, and no character is universally applicable. Not 100% sure if I agree with that, but I sort of get the point that, like, most people, you could argue one way or another. And then they continue, furthermore, approaching a tier list is difficult because of how many facets this game has. Prime Aquaman, for example, is an S tier card in the context of full Survivor runs, but rarely seen in meta online teams. With that being said, I don't think the S tier should be empty either, so I'll throw a couple of cards up for debate, though I think the more interesting topic would be the cards that don't quite make the cut. I think the only S tier meta card is New 52 Shazam. Other meta cards are strong, but he stands out as the best due to his synergies with other S or A tier characters, strong specials, and annoyingly strong passive. Some people would place Batman Ninja Catwoman in S tier, but I think she only deserves A tier due to her weak specials, lack of synergies, and mediocre passive. Sure, she has good basic attacks, but we're a long time past the meta of basic attacks. I don't even think any other metals are worth considering for an S tier slot.
So I want to stop Caleb right there.
Yeah.
I'm going to say the conclusion on Batman Ninja Catwoman is based on a flawed premise. It is not a mediocre passive. That there are probably, I think, two characters who, in this world of Tantu Totem, still have enough juice in their basics that they can be the prime mover, the
that they can be the
damage
primary damage dealer as a basic damage dealer.
Yeah, so it could be, I think, Flashpoint Deathstroke if there's Flashpoint Batman, and Flashpoint Batman by himself if you're going to do that, and Batman Ninja Catwoman. The amount of extra damage that she does when she's tagging in her passive is still active.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. I think you can do enough with a couple of swipe combos when she's at a comparable stat level as her opponent.
Yeah.
She can mow through them. I mean, even a specialist would have trouble with Astro Harness. I think that's really the only trouble. Sometimes teams that will reverse power drain with the LexCorp gear set.
Yeah.
Maybe that's going to be a problem. But that doesn't change the fact that I think she is spectacular. New 52 Shazam is good. I feel like his damage output isn't enough. So when we make the point that this is where the criteria comes in, right? So a lot of times you can make the argument that a character is really good because they don't need anybody to make them any better, and even by themselves with no other
synergies or like support
characters, that they'll still be pretty amazing. And I can see where New 52 Shazam is potentially like that, but to take advantage of his passive, he needs a teammate. He can't be the last man standing before his passive triggers.
Yeah.
Because if he does, then he loses it. And there's been a bunch of times where by manipulating how Hawkgirl can lock somebody in, if we can make New 52 Shazam show up last before he triggers his passive, you've lost a lot of what makes him good. Yeah.
And to be fair, that is like when you see him defensively, that you don't get the same problem when you're playing as him, right? You can usually control that a lot better.
Right. So I agree, though, that I wouldn't include any other metal characters, but I think I would rank Batman Ninja Catwoman a little bit higher than New 52 Shazam.
Yeah. But you think they both belong in S?
I think so. The limitation of New 52 Shazam is the part where he gets really good with his passive is time limited, and he needs to be bumped off screen before he comes back to take advantage of it. And either he has his support team around him has to kill time, or they get knocked out so fast he's right back. But then you are on a really tight time limit to get things done.
I think he's good for winning consistently, but he definitely loses points for being slower.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. In a similar vein, I think very few golds deserve a spot in S tier. In an attempt to keep this comment as short as possible, I'll just give a quick list of my S tier picks with the short reasoning. If you're interested, I'll also have a list of cards that I think others would put in S tier, but I'm purposefully skipping over. And so we'll read through at least the S tier, and then we might skip the sort of gold, but not quite. We'll see. Hawkgirl Prime is a clear choice. Tantu Totem by a mile is the best gear card in the game, and she makes any totem user that much better. We talked about this last week, so I don't think we need to...
And the interesting thing is, maybe it's the crowd that we've got, or the people have heard us say this and don't even remember it, but there's a lot of S tier lists that do not include Hawkgirl Prime anywhere near the top.
Or they're pandering to us.
Maybe.
Right? Maybe they're telling us what we want to hear.
But I think so. I mean, I've said a lot of times, it takes... When you take into account the fact that it's teams, and tagging in and tagging out is such an important part of the teams, the fact that she's the only person that can do this kind of thing where the one thing that you need to do, you can do better.
And more often,
that nobody else can help you with, I think this is it. Yeah.
I would give Rebirth Raven a spot in S tier. She gives a very dangerous sort of inevitability to your team, and her passive works as a great defense by removing your opponent's power. I said gear. And offense by giving that power to herself. That sort of utility is incredible value and found on very few cards. I feel like, did we also talk about Rebirth Raven last week? I feel like we did.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the reason why, and we've talked about her a lot, it's part of the reason why these two are our go-to bread and butter.
Yeah.
If you need a team, you put almost any character with these two, team's going to be
great.
good.
Yeah. It's tough to say which Flashpoint character deserves a spot because I do think at least one of them does. On the one hand, Flashpoint Deathstroke is an offensive monster, but on the other, Batman's crit boost and anti-heal or Aquaman's water shield shouldn't be ignored, especially since these characters pair well with the S tier New 52 Shazam, while Deathstroke does not. And so we did already talk about this team last week as well. That's the one good thing about sort of going through comments in chronological. Is that like there's a lot of overlap, and this is exactly what we're talking about. There is always going to be a lot of overlap, almost no matter what your criteria is. There are some characters that just everybody thinks are the best in the game because they are clearly among the best in the game.
Yeah, so let's unpack this a little bit to state a little bit more explicitly what Caleb is implying. I think the reason why Flashpoint Batman and Flashpoint Aquaman pair well with New 52 Shazam is that New 52 Shazam's passive will benefit both of them.
Yeah.
On the other hand, though, I don't need him to benefit both of them. You can really see that in how a full Flashpoint team works, where you don't need Hawkgirl, you don't need Rebirth Raven, and their damage output is just so high. To me, the most important Flashpoint character, the best Flashpoint character is Flashpoint Deathstroke, but requires
Batman.
Batman to unlock him.
So I think really this is the question of methodology, right? If you are just looking at the people who are able to be the best in the game, then has to be Deathstroke, right?
Yeah.
If you're looking at the people who get them there, the required characters to be with them as a pairing, you put Flashpoint Batman, right? And if you are valuing broad versatility versus specific versatility, right? These guys are super powerful, but they are not very versatile, right? You kind of need to put Deathstroke and Batman together to get them to be an S tier, right? If you had one but not the other, they'd probably be like A tiers.
Yeah, because Flashpoint Batman just doesn't do enough damage on his specials.
Yeah.
His special 2 is awful. It's such low damage. His special 1 is okay, but it's the same limitation as the other Batmans. I think that the damage is reduced because of the status effect.
Yeah. So like we've already talked about last week, Deathstroke for sure, Batman for sure, Aquaman, hard to say, right? You know, he could be S tier, he could be high A tier. He's definitely very good, right?
I think you're top. If any Flashpoint character, until even after they start adding them, because there are so few options, I think any Flashpoint character is at least a high A tier as a starting point for discussion.
Especially because of the other abilities, right? That Flashpoint Batman, for example, gives. Yeah.
Right.
So there we go. I'd like to give a spot to Arkham Knight Batgirl, as she is very strong both offensively and defensively. Saving teammates by stunning and setting up for a debilitating special in retaliation is very good, but I could be argued into giving her an A tier slot. I don't think any other Arkham character deserves an S tier slot.
So we already said Arkham Knight Batman, I think, is pretty much...
Arkham Knight Batgirl.
No, I'm saying we've said last time Arkham Knight Batman is pretty much up there, but Arkham Knight Batgirl, we've been really clear about how much we love her.
Yeah, I think a lot of the Batgirls are really good.
Yeah.
I think, you know, if you're comparing them to the total roster, that sort of bomb special 1...
All those skins of Batgirl have that same advantage.
You could probably argue almost any of them up to S tier. I think, you know, if you're being really exclusive and you're saying, you know, if there are other people who do similar things, that they sort of every archetype of character only gets one slot, then you could argue them more. But I would be more than happy. Every Batgirl's at least high A tier,
right? Because of its special one, right?
But I think you could argue a lot of them into S tier because the difference in utility between Arkham Knight Batgirl and a lot of the other Batgirls is not huge.
I'd say Arkham Knight Batgirl and Batgirl Prime are better than Cassandra Cain Batgirl.
That's true.
Because they're extra passive, right? Like if you look at, because they're good just from the special 1, but Prime Batgirl has power immediately at no cost, which obviously sticks her higher than Arkham Origins Bane, who needs to take damage to get power, and having it right at the beginning has more value than having it getting it later.
Yeah.
In Arkham Knight Batgirl, her passive, I mean, for practical purposes, lets her twice in a fight with Arkham teammates to not only save them, so you're increasing those other teammates' values. If you stack them with Tentu Totem, you get another time where you can tag in with a lot of power to drop a bomb. But you also, because they're stunned, she gets to drop her own bomb.
That's true.
And we've seen with her loadout now that she doesn't need to have any power. If you gear her with Cloak of Destiny and Necron Scythe and basic damage boosting, crit damage on basics boosting chance, that she can do enough usually on one swipe combo when she tags in to save her teammate to knock out the opponent.
Yeah. And so one thing, you know, that wasn't explicitly stated, but I think we can see a little bit in this person's list, is that they're not specifically like docking in points if they're relatively slower fights, right?
Right.
Because Arkham Knight Batgirl compared to Batgirl Prime is slower, right? She's really good.
She's slower because of the way you have to play her.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to take full advantage of her, she's slower because you're saving her and holding her back until one of your teammates is in trouble.
Well, and Batgirl Prime almost just definitionally is faster just because of the power, right? She makes any team faster no matter what. There's no sort of like it's totally instant gratification.
Except Arkham Knight Batgirl makes any Arkham team better.
Yeah, better but not faster.
Right. But just I guess there's also the value you play, right? Because some fast teams, it's risk reward. You can be really fast. There's a small risk because of that you're going to lose.
Yeah.
I think Arkham Knight Batgirl it's one of those things that makes
highly consistent.
Makes the chance of you losing so small. Like, because you're getting saved twice, I find myself getting a little bit sloppy sometimes because, shoot, I don't care if my Arkham...
Yeah, you can afford to make mistakes.
And it's not even make a mistake. If you just let it happen, you're going to have an even faster fight.
That's true.
Like, it's that kind of, it's like a war of attrition where you're not worried about trading off pieces because you know you're going to win in the end.
It's like chess. You're just trying to be up material. You're not never trying to lose a pawn.
Right.
Yeah. Right. We also have Blackest Night Batman. Is the closest Blackest Night card to S tier. His unblockable chance and strong special 2 are great, though I do wish it had more range, but he could be easily put into A tier. What do we think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't even know that Blackest Night Batman is the best Blackest Night card. I mean, I think when you look at passives, Blackest Night Flash has the wildest passive. It has so many abilities into it if you break it down. And the ability to reverse damage over time and get power and health, that's wild. But it doesn't happen often enough, so I'd be a little bit reluctant to put him there. Now, the unblockable chance is great. It's better on the AI than it is on yourself because the AI completes basics even when they're blocked.
So there's extra chances for it to trigger.
Right, so you're almost guaranteed to trigger it on a basic combo.
Yeah.
And on a multi-hit special, also higher chance.
Yeah.
But when we're stuck as not the AI, it doesn't work so great on the basics. He's got a strong special too, but that's no stronger than any other character with a high attack, and I think his attack is higher than his health, which is the way we like it for the base stats. I mean, definitely I think most of the Blackest Knights I would consider as the good ones, I guess I would consider A. I think Blackest Night Batman and Flash are high A tier, if not S tier, but you'd have to convince me a little bit on Batman.
Yeah. And last up, Luchador Bane is an iffy inclusion, but he can often clear ladders so fast, I think he is at least worth considering. And so this is sort of the one place where we see, like, this is what I was saying earlier, where this person values consistency and power. Mm-hmm. This is clearly, valuing the speed, like clearing so fast that they're worth considering. But it seems like they're not docking points so much for, on average, slower fights. Fast is good. Really, really fast is obviously good. Yeah. But a little bit slower doesn't really cost you as much in this person's eyes.
And I think we're in line mostly because Caleb says that after that they'd be willing to cut including
Luchador Bane, which he says Lucy Bane, B and Bats, and AK Batgirl. Which
I think Arkham Knight Batgirl is higher. I think the Arkham Knight Batgirl is higher than the other two.
Yeah.
We're pretty much in.
Man, they say, of course, by making such a small S tier, I'm fully prepared to have missed someone, but if I'm wrong, at least it will generate some interesting conversation. Anyways, if you're still here, here's a small list of A tier cards that I think just aren't quite S tier, and maybe I won't read all of these. Do any of them stand out to you as wrong, in your opinion?
Yeah, Jessica Cruz.
Yeah.
So Caleb says, I think Jessica Cruz is actually really bad. I see her all the time on ladder, and she just feels like the biggest noob trap in the game. I will disagree. I think the real danger of her is that her special 2 is absolutely bonkers. That when she's got 2 Green Lantern teammates, the amount of extra hits at the bottom, there are very few specialists that can handle Astro Harness as well as she does, because her special 2 lasts so long that it can outlast sometimes 2 invulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Which to me is wild. Like, that is ridiculous. And I think what's unusual and good about her is how she's got all those extra hits on her combo ender, but that's not what makes her super effective. It's when you've got her on a full Green Lantern team that her special 2 is wild for the amount of damage it does and just output immediately, plus the damage over time, plus how long it lasts, makes her super. I think she's... I don't know that she's S tier. Yeah. I strongly disagree with her being actually bad.
Yeah. Okay. And I think, the rest of them we don't necessarily need to read, but there is a part at the end that I definitely do want to read because it's exactly what we said we were interested in before, so I appreciate the inclusion. So they say, sorry for the essay, but your challenge really inspired me to think about where I'd place the characters in a serious tier list. and we appreciate that. It's nice that, people ask us this all the time, and it's done the same thing for us, right? So it's kind of nice that we are doing the same thing for other people, as people asking us has done for us. And then they say at the end, just for those curious about any biasing, my favorite online teams are Wonder Woman 600 plus Killer Frost plus Batman Ninja Catwoman, or Arkham Knight Bats plus Arkham Knight Batgirl plus Arkham Origins Deathstroke. And then they say, yes, I do use Batman Ninja Catwoman despite pooping on her. And so I think that's funny, right? Because multiple of the characters in this team, they also say that, some of the characters that they use are don't make S tier, right? In their own comment, which I think is pretty funny. But
it's absolutely true. Like, we don't always go S tier. It's like Dos Equis. We don't always. What is it? I don't always drink beer, but when we do, it's Dos Equis.
Because Wonder Woman 600 is also in their list of A tier that don't belong in S tier characters, and so two of those characters are specifically not S tier for their preferred thing. So I think this is interesting. I think you can infer like at least a little bit if you sort of look more deeply at these characters and teams and what they mean for preferred playstyle. But it's fun, and it's also kind of a recurring theme of what this person finds interesting, right? Their interesting part is the stuff that doesn't quite make the cut. It's not sort of what's S tier, it's what's right on the line and why people argue it up or down, which I think is on a fundamental level the same thing that we're talking about, right? It's the criteria, your underlying reasoning, because the really easy ones are all easy in the same way, right? There's no disagreement, there's no whatever. It's where sort of people who play the game a lot and who have informed opinions can still have very different opinions, and why those happen. That is, I think, where you learn about sort of the players more than the characters.
And I'd argue if you have the flexibility to play a lot of the same teams, like if you have a favorite team or favorite teams that you can and do choose to play a lot, then I think the starting point isn't to say who belongs on S tier, is that, well, at this point you need to tell me why they're not on S tier.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And I think the other thing too is that I think the more you play only one team, if you have a clear favorite, right, those are your S tier, but it also gives you less perspective on who else is good, right? We see that over and over with us, where we have pre-existing opinions on who's good and who's not. And it's actually kind of funny because I think being forced to look at the characters for the YouTube specifically.
And the Lost Challenge characters now.
I said the YouTube. I meant like our YouTube channel, but I just ended up saying the YouTube like I was 80 years old. The Facebook. But there's hackers on there.
It started with the weekly recap and forcing ourselves to use each challenge character, and even more so this season where we're forcing ourselves to use all the Lost Challenge characters, who are probably not going to be lost for too long, knock on wood, hopefully.
Yeah, so I think like we have learned over and over again that the opinions that we have of characters are often wrong, right? And what it takes is a little more time playing with them. And so I think, the advantage of that is that we have probably more perspective than the average person who gets into those sort of behavior ruts. We have sort of external reasons to not get stuck in those patterns and not break out of them. But it's also shown us just how often our opinions or our first impressions of characters are wrong, right? So I think we're probably both a little bit more... The term is intellectual humility, right? Where we acknowledge sort of how frequently we have unfair initial opinions, but we also have a much broader sort of overview of more characters than a lot of people probably do, both because we have everybody, but also because we play more people, because we have an external sort of motivation to play more people that we wouldn't do if we were just playing ourselves.
Okay.
So I think
we're gonna have a part three S tiers
for people who like this discussion. That's great, and for people who like us talking about non-injustice stuff, come
back in a few weeks.
So that brings us to the end of this week. To finish up, we'd like to give a huge thank you to our lovely patrons on Patreon, and I think I'll let you say their beautiful names this week.
Okay, that would be Michael Devries, Irvin Ruiz, Hoshi127, Nora Klimek, and Paolo-Cesar-Pablo-Juan, who are supporting us on the credit level, and 5x5, who's supporting us on the gratitude level.
There we go. Thank you so much for your direct support, and thanks so much to all of you for your indirect support that's watching, and a different type of direct support if it's commenting. We will see you next time. Komoda.